different regions. Professor Engineer Dr. Muhammad Shahiliu, Deputy Vice Chancellor, Research, Innovation and Commercialization, Universiti Teknologi PETRONAS. Associate Professor Dr. Sharina Muhammad Nordin, Director, Institute of Self-Sustainable Building, Universiti Teknologi PETRONAS. Our distinguished speakers today, Dr. Nick Wave and Mr. Ibrahim Arifin, members of the floor, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Amila, and I will be moderating the forum today. So we'll be spending for the next 2 hours together. Welcome to the webinar En route to Net Zero Malaysia 2050 in oil and gas with the theme Malaysia's pathway to net zero. Today, I hope that we are going to have a fruitful session, refreshing our minds with the topic of the day, net zero carbon, in the context of oil and gas sector. Being one of the largest contributors to Malaysia's economy, the impact of climate change is significant by oil and gas in terms of carbon emission. Alongside most of the countries in the world, Malaysia has made the commitment to achieve net zero carbon by 2050. I do not know about most of you out there, but for me, when we were thinking about doing this webinar together with Energy Institute and also the Malaysia government, I have lots of questions. For example, what does net zero mean? Will net zero mean a complete end to CO2 emission? What does net zero mean for individuals? How can we, Malaysia, best manage carbon neutrality ambition, 2050 ambition? What path will we take to get there? Kementerian Alam Sekitar, or the Ministry of Environment and Water, has indicated that oil and gas sector is the biggest methane emission source in the country. Hence, it would be interesting to hear later from our keynote speaker, Petronas' viewpoint on the commitment to net zero carbon. The UK, as one of the first countries that made the commitment to net zero, it would be interesting to hear from Dr. Nick later. What has UK committed to do? What other countries have promised? What pathway has the UK taken, for example? What can Malaysia we learn from it? And maybe some of the challenges that we could talk about. So all these, I hope we will be able to talk about within our forum. And in case that we run short of time to respond to all of the questions that we have, at the very least, I hope the session triggers the curious cat in all of us that will start us on a journey of discovery and commitment to net zero carbon. Okay. So next slide, please. Let me just put up here for everybody's reference. This will be our session today, where we'll have a keynote address by Mr. Bacho Pilong, Senior Vice President, Project Delivery and Technology Petronas. And we have two speakers. One is Dr. Nick Wave, Chief Executive Officer from the Energy Institute UK. And from Malaysia, Mr. Ibrahim Arifin, Director of Energy and Director Energy Analyst, Strategic Planning Division from Sustainable Energy Development Authority, or we here know as SEDA, from Malaysia. And I'll be moderating the session until the end of the session, right? So with that, ladies and gentlemen, let us start our webinar today. I am pleased to invite for welcoming remarks Professor Engineer Dr. Muhammad Shahiliu, Deputy Vice Chancellor, Research, Innovation and Commercialization, Universiti Teknologi PETRONAS, and also Chairman of Energy Institute Malaysia. First, Prof, allow me to read your biography as an introduction to our participants today. As a proponent in the energy sector, Professor Shahi is currently the chairman of the Energy Institute Malaysia. He has served as the chairman of the Competency and Training Working Group and as the honorary secretary for Malaysia Oil and Gas Services, or MOXSI. He also chaired the Human Resource Development Fund, HRDF, for the National Occupational Skills Standard and Sectorial Training Committee under Oil and Gas. Prof. Shahid obtained his Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering and PhD in 1983 and 87 respectively from Texas, USA. He is a professional engineer in Texas, Malaysia and Asian, and chartered energy engineer and fellow at Energy Institute. He made his career in the consultancy management industry, ranging from capital projects, facility management, project management, and project design, spanning 23 years in the USA and the Asian region. With a penchant for training, research, and mentoring engineers, even during his tenure as consultant, Prof. Shahid joined Universiti Teknologi PETRONAS in 2009 and currently serves as Deputy Vice Chancellor for Research, Innovation, and Commercialization since 2017. With that, Prof, I would like to welcome you to give your welcoming remarks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Amila. First of all, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. May peace be upon you. I would like to address, first of all, our keynote address speaker, Mr. Bacho Pilong, Senior Vice President, PD&T Petronas. We also have with us Dr. Neat Wave, Chief Executive Officer for Energy Institute, and Mr. Ibrahim Arifin, Director Energy Analyst with Sustainable Energy Development Authority, Malaysia. And also, I have noted there are a long list of Petronas OPUs in here, our industry captains, my colleagues, my friends, ladies and gentlemen. Very good afternoon and very good morning to Dr. Nick all the way from United Kingdom. Thank you for being able to join us here. In fact, we just finished our SPE symposium a while ago, and we have gentlemen from Netherlands and also United Kingdom. Both are GMT 0 country, and so you know they are 8 hours different from us, and they have been up and awake since 4 a.m. doing that. So we appreciate that, Dr. Nick. Without going further, as you know, we just came out from COP26. This is an interesting time. This topic, Net Zero Webinar Series 2021, is actually a good platform to discuss related topics such as decarbonization, renewable energy, challenges and strategies needed to achieve net zero in the oil and gas industry. We know in September 2021, the Malaysian government had came out with the 12 Malaysian plan announcing a carbon neutrality target of 2050. That's what our Prime Minister had indicated. And this is a significant challenge, particularly for the oil and gas industry, which is a main contributor to the Malaysian economy and greenhouse gas emission. So it comes with that. And 72% of emissions stem from energy production, the remaining being caused by activities such as farming, livestock, chemical reaction necessary to produce goods and raw materials. Malaysian delegation achieved the 4 mandates that the cabinet gave in COP26. This includes negotiation on rules governing international carbon markets, transparency of emission reporting, common time frame for the nationally determined contribution, and climate finance. We are also committed to halt deforestation by 2030 and presented its updated NDC to reduce economy-wide carbon intensity against GDP by 45% in 2030 at COP26. We have also announced our plan to set up domestic emission trading scheme, a voluntary carbon market, and commitment to methane reduction. We have been informed, as you know, you read in the press, Petronas has been engaged by the government as on methane, as a country oil and gas sector is the biggest methane emission source. And we, as Petronas, has also understand our aspiration to achieve net zero carbon emission by 2050, capitalizing on the maturity of ESG practices while securing the company's long-term value. Net zero carbon emission 2050 will stretch Petronas' efforts to reduce carbon emission to net zero and create new and inclusive opportunities that contribute towards a just transition where we operate. Becoming a net zero emission energy business means that the industry needs to operate consistently with the net zero ambition, reduce production emissions, and make serious progress on the solution that can contribute towards net zero. While saying all of that, I also would like to share one or two interesting points. Take note that in COP26, we have OECD country, we have developed country, we have underdeveloped country, all in one basket. And when we put all of that in one basket, it doesn't work very well because there are countries struggling with food sources. There are countries which have difficulty in securing food, and they would not particularly care about COP26. There are also geopolitical differences around the world today that makes it difficult to achieve this target. And at the same time, we know, I always say this to people, we are trying to achieve something great in digital technology, but at the same time, we know only 50% of the world population have access to Wi-Fi, much less 4G and 5G that we are talking about. In addition to that, we also take note that all these countries, when we put together, we have a lot of work to do. COP26, at best, to me, is at the moment a form of a paper progress, but the real progress will have yet to be seen. But I remain optimistic about it because as a learned society here today, Energy Institute included, we know that moving towards that would be the best thing and the best choice for the Earth as a total picture. And with that, we also know that the country aspiration towards net zero is as important as anybody else. The contribution made by Malaysia is going to be significant for us and for us to work towards that. Last but not least, I also would like to share that during this energy transition, right, there are a lot of challenges. We need to reskill, upskill. We need also to address the industry where we wanted to be in terms of net zero, how we want to achieve that. We've been discussing quite a fair bit of that. And even yesterday, I was with TMB Research, and we were talking about where we would be looking towards the nation in terms of energy transition. And I'm happy to say that next year, there'll be a series of webinars, right? I'm not doing marketing here, but I'm coming up together with Energy Institute to look at how this energy transition will look like. So we are going to engage all the key stakeholders, Petronas included, TMB included, SEDA included, Porim included. There are a lot of these other government sectors that will come in, and let us together craft an interesting net zero ambition for Malaysia. So we are the learned society. We can do that. I would like to welcome all the participants, and I hope you will enjoy this sharing session with our keynote address and also our speakers per se. So thank you very much for this opportunity. Godspeed.
Thank you very much, Prof, for the very warm welcome to all our speakers and also the members of the audience today. It is really, really inspiring to know that Energy Institute has also, you're going to lead Energy Institute Malaysia to anchor the agenda of this net zero carbon or energy transition. And we look forward to be part of Malaysia's commitment towards net zero carbon 2050. Yeah? Right. So before we move to our the photo session, before we move on to our speaking session, I would like to invite Prof. Shahid, Dr. Nick Wise, Mr. Ibrahim Arifi, Associate Professor Dr. Sharina, to turn on your video so that we can do photo op for the record. Yeah. All right. So Biha, are you ready? Please do the counting. Yeah?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. In a count of 3, everyone with a big smile. 1, 2, 3. Another one.
Okay, done. All right. So thank you very much, Prof. Thank you, Dr. Sharina. So we will move on to our session. There will be 2 parts of the session this afternoon. The first session will be we will start with keynote address by Mr. Bacho Pilong. I will read his introduction first. Yeah, Mr. Bacho Pilong currently is the Senior Vice President of Project Delivery and Technology, the position he holds since August 2021. Prior to this, he had been holding several senior positions, including the Vice President of Malaysia Assets, Vice President of International Assets, and also the Head of Production and Operation Management, a unit under Malaysia Petroleum Management, the exploration and production regulatory arm of Malaysia that functioned under the Petronas Group. He joined the Petronas Group in 1992 as a process engineer and has since been serving in various technical and leadership positions. Mr. Bacho has also been assigned to overseas postings in Vietnam, Sudan, and South Sudan. Mr. Bacho currently sits on the board of Petronas companies such as Petronas Technical Service Sendirian Berhad and the Institute of Technology Petronas Sendirian Berhad ITPSB, which is essentially he is UTP, he's sitting on UTP board. Okay, so without further ado, let us listen to the keynote address by Mr. Bacho Pilong. The volume, yeah. There's no sound. Yeah.
In this, Assalamualaikum warahmatullah, and a very, very good afternoon to all participants. Thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts on the subject of net zero ambition and strategies in oil and gas in this platform. It goes without saying, the world yearns for a sustainable future. And Petronas, as a national oil company, wants to be part of the solution. And you are making this commitment to make a positive change for the world, especially for Malaysia and our younger generations. I grew up in an island of Pulau Sebatik, the east coast of Sabah, and interestingly, this island is partly Malaysia and partly Indonesia. As always, we have many good memories, fond memories of our growing up years in the simple island. Life was simple and yet meaningful and memorable. I left the island back in the 80s to pursue my higher education. 40 years on, it's a family tradition that I go back to the island on day 2 of Hari Raya to celebrate with our folks in the island. That's my past, and that could be also my future as far as folks living in the island. Pulau Sebatik and other similar islands are the most vulnerable to the effect of climate change, such as rising temperature and sea level. Rising sea level will interfere with habitable land and culture. Agricultural, commercial, and tourism sector will be severely impacted because of this. If this happened to the small island Pulau Sebatik, younger generation and future residents in the island will not be able to create similar great memories as I did. It will not be the same heaven as it has been for me. Sustainable future and net zero carbon emission aspiration is important and personal to me. Pulau Sebatik and Malaysia in general is a paradise that must be protected from the effect of climate change. This is also why Petronas, that inherently belongs to Malaysia and its people, is taking serious steps towards net zero carbon emission. The oil and gas industry committed to deliver clean energy solution, demonstrated by our commitment to net zero carbon emission by many major players. By 2020, many oil and gas players have declared net zero carbon emission and reduced emission targets, majority either by 2050 or even earlier. Despite of the various pathway and approaches, there are 3 basic elements remain consistent throughout. First is about strengthening emission management. This is fundamental. We need to manage and reduce our emission, and examples of these are the venting and flaring that are part of existing oil and gas operations. Technologies are being deployed to not just monitor this emission more accurately, but also to reduce and mitigate throughout the energy supply chain. Second, low carbon solution. Aligned with net zero carbon emission ambitions, oil and gas companies, including us in Petronas, are providing low carbon energy solutions. For example, LNG as a clean alternative for the energy transition. Companies are also embarking on bio-based manufacturing to provide sustainable products to the customers. And third is about engagement and communication. Proactive and continuous engagement with stakeholders are very important in this multi-year journey. Partnerships and co-development of solutions will be critical to ensure sustainable ecosystem that can support our aspiration to climate change. Feedbacks and input from peers outside of oil and gas, government bodies, academia are very, very much welcome. COP26 and Paris Agreement to secure global net zero by mid-century and keep 1.5 degrees within reach is forcing countries and oil companies like us to strengthen our climate action. Petronas is acutely aware of stakeholders' expectation about climate action that support the Paris Agreement. Petronas is not simply a dollar and cent business, but rather an institution that cannot fail because the ultimate beneficiary of Petronas is Malaysian. We recognize the responsibility to balance out our economic ambition with positive social and environmental consideration. We must also consider the very country progress differently and not all are created equal. Hence, there is no single path towards a carbon neutral world. Malaysia, being a developed nation that still relies on energy heavily for its growth, must consider a just transition. To a hit from COVID-19 pandemic, our company have repositioned our statement of purpose to indicate that we will become a progressive energy player, enriching life for a sustainable future. In Petronas corridors, this is indeed considered as the Great Reset. As oil and gas player, we always recognize that energy transition needs to be addressed and gas advocacy as the transition fuel. We still believe LNG will be playing a key part in the energy mix as the world is growing at different speed and Asia Pacific will still be energy intensive in its growth and LNG is still considered to be a compelling alternative. This shows that there is still life and promise in this business, yet now we must produce cleaner and also we must be cost effective. In 2020, we set targets for Petronas that can be encapsulated in what we call MFT 50-30-0, moving forward together 50-30-0. This is 50% improvement in our cash flow from operation in 5 years by 25, 30% revenue stream from non-traditional sources, and it is wrapped around on a longer term of a net zero carbon emission by 2050. With this landmark move on the announcement of net zero carbon emission 2050 aspiration, Petronas became the first oil and gas company in Asia to adopt this goal. Our net zero carbon 2050 aspiration underscores our ambition to meet higher sustainability goals for the longer term that address stakeholder concern and support the Paris Agreement. In addition, it will not only strengthen the momentum of our climate action, but also ensure that Petronas business remain resilient for the longest time. It also provides the necessary impetus for us to pursue more climate-friendly solutions and opportunities in the broader energy space that will create sustainable new values for the organizations. Petronas net zero carbon emission 2050 aspiration is anchored on a high-level strategy with the principles of measure, reduce, and offset that is enabled by 4 key levers. These strategies will be approached with life cycle thinking and just transition in mind. We will capitalize on Petronas' strong foundation of operational excellence to manage Scope 1 and Scope 2 emission performance down. For example, conversion from venting to flaring in Baronia platform in Sarawak, and reducing 78% of GHG emissions. A portfolio of new low-carbon solutions under the new plastic NPE, bio-based product and CO2 utilization coupled with hydrogen will provide a wider range of business opportunities for downstream and petchem business. Part of the example is our recent acquisition of M+ Solar. With regard to carbon offset, forest-based carbon offset should be capped to 20% of carbon footprint in any time to allow other technology options to take priorities. These three strategies are enabled by 4 key levers. We are leveraging on operational excellence to reduce flaring and venting through process optimization, installation of gas recovery or injection system, and when-to-flare conversion. We also mitigate GHG emission from operation through energy efficiency improvement and the use of low carbon or renewable energy, and minimizing waste and promote recycling throughout the value chain. Our second lever is about low carbon energy solution, emphasizing more on solutions such as natural gas as low carbon fuel, renewable energy including electricity, green hydrogen, biofuel, and bio-based product. Our third lever is about technology development. Innovation will be accelerated to deploy low carbon tech solutions such as CCUS, offshore wind, and solar PV, and also the use of more bio-based feedstock to produce low carbon or carbon neutral product, the use of waste as feedstock through circular economy to produce low carbon or carbon neutral product, and deploy GHG reduction enablers such as energy storage solution, and finally through the carbon offset. Guided by our MFT 50-30-0 I mentioned before, net zero carbon aspiration approach strategies, formula and levers, we aim to accelerate our move towards 2050 by setting 3 short-term sustainability targets. First, in managing our GHG emission, we target to cap our emission to 49.5 million tons CO2 equivalent for our Malaysia operation, and to increase our renewable energy capacity to 3 gigawatt by 2024. And also in our effort to nurture future talents, we target to reach out about 24,000 of beneficiaries through our various education programs. The gears, cogs, and wheel have moved since our net zero carbon emission aspiration announcement, and as our first half of 2021 sustainability disclosure, we are surely and steadfastly moving toward our short-term target despite some of the setback due to the pandemics. There are many real-world projects that Petronas is currently undertaking with various partners to drive our net ZE ambition. And some of these initiatives, we aim to support the ecosystem of low-carbon economy in Malaysia and globally. For instance, number 1, digital and robotic deployment. Through digital transformation and deployment of robotic solution in our operation, we are able to reduce energy intensity of our asset, reduce exposure of risk to our people, and provide enhanced reliability to our operations. Subsea factory, specifically in our upstream operation, Petronas is embarking on technology to deploy subsea solution in order to provide low cost, high reliability, and low carbon solution for our challenging offshore assets. And currently we are piloting some of these initiatives to ensure successful deployment in the future asset development. Third is about circular economy. Turning waste to value is another initiative that we are currently embarking to provide sustainable product to our customers. Through this initiative, we are working with various stakeholders in Malaysia to to establish an ecosystem that can strengthen the way we manage waste. The same thing, providing customers with low carbon alternative for plastics. And last but not least is our renewable energy. We acquired M+, the largest developer of commercial and distributed solar energy in India. In Malaysia, we already have about 90 megawatt of solar asset in operation and under development. And in India, we have the largest single location open access solar farm located in the state of Karnataka at 175 megawatt. And also, we signed an agreement with Source Energy, a solar energy startup in Malaysia. And we are also looking for opportunities in Vietnam and India for both offshore and onshore wind energy. The next is CCUS, carbon capture and sequestration, capturing carbon emission from the source. These captured carbon gases are subsequently sequestered in naturally secure and tightly sealed location, and in some cases may be used for other processes. Petronas' first CCS project is currently underway, Kasawari, and upon completion in 2025, will be the largest offshore CCS project to date. And last but not least, hydrogen is particularly suitable as a clean energy source, as its combustion only release clean energy and no carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Hydrogen could also be used as a battery source in fuel cell, as a portable energy to power transportation and mobility. And also, we are realizing a decarbonized world via strategic partnership within and outside Malaysia. For example, we have established collaboration with JERA in Japan, largest power generation company, to collaborate on a wide-ranging of low-carbon energy initiative, including LNG, ammonia, and hydrogens, hence complementing our position to be a green hydrogen solution partner. We are also in collaboration with INOS Corporation in Japan to jointly develop a competitive clean hydrogen supply chain between Malaysia and Japan, and to explore other hydrogen initiatives. Maybe some example what we have achieved so far is MOU with Plastic Energy. This is to support the circular economy. We also have embarked on carbon reduction effort through RE, through Project Vera. I mentioned about M+ in India, and for residential source in Malaysia. And the next one is recently we have signed an MOU with Exxon on CCUS, which is currently ongoing. And last but not least, our hydrogen initiative, I mentioned before about JERA and also INOS. Petronas, as an organization, have taken step ahead among the oil and gas industry players in Malaysia with our move in this agenda. Net zero carbon emission target is not and should not be a one organization show and responsibility. The keyword is creating an ecosystem to tackle this issue comprehensively. But Petronas is only one part of the oil and gas value chain. To succeed, an orchestrated effort needs to be in place by pulling everybody in the whole ecosystem to play their roles and identify what are the missions scopes that are within the scope, so that collectively we can achieve the intended outcome. As a start, Petronas is bringing together local and international industry thought leaders on Petronas Future Talks to engage in a series of conversations on energy transition as the world shifts towards a low-carbon future. We must first be committed to a greater transparency in reporting our core sustainability metrics. Petronas adopted stakeholder capitalism metrics by World Economic Forum. Policy is important to promote and accelerate net zero carbon emission 50 target. We also need to look at the lesson learned in advanced market so that it will be path a smoother way to our net zero carbon emission 2050 aspiration. Academia such as UTP, local and private education institutions play a vital role in creating sustainability program and awareness. Students and our brilliant young minds can greatly contribute in supporting net zero carbon emission 2050 aspiration. Sustainability and net zero carbon emission can be the core subject in the final year projects and thesis. Petronas also have teamed up with 15 local universities under its collaboration with Higher Education Strategy Initiative, we call it CHES, to catalyze industry academia knowledge sharing in technical areas aligned with Petronas' sustainability goal. As concluding thoughts, Petronas and our efforts show our desire to build a better world, a much better world to meet sustainability objectives and at the same time to be in position to benefit from low carbon economy. However, we cannot carry all the responsibilities alone. The industry, together with the academia, the government, policymaker can and must work together to address climate change and net zero carbon emission commitment. We must not wait any longer. My hometown, Pulau Sebatik, and your hometown, wherever it is in Malaysia, will soon feel the deteriorating impact of climate change if we sit idle. In order to battle climate change, we must have the climate to change. Thank you for your attention. Wishing everyone a fruitful and meaningful conference. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bacho Pilong, for the keynote address. Yeah, in order to battle climate change, we must have a climate to change. That's his last word. And I am so glad to hear from the two leaders that echo similar message, whereby it takes collaborative efforts, and also we need to have more of this kind of conversation to take place. So I am so glad that we're having this conversation. Okay, right. So next, we will move on to the speakers for today. We have two, as I mentioned earlier. Our first speaker, let me introduce Dr. Nick Wyeth, Chief Executive Officer, Energy Institute UK. Dr. Nick Wyeth has held a broad career at the forefront of change in the energy industry as it adapts even ever faster to tackling climate change. Nick spent nearly 22 years at BP PLC in a broad variety of executive and management roles. Most recently, Nick held the post of Chief Development Officer of Alternative Energy, where he led BP's strategy and business development in a broad range of renewable technologies, including solar, offshore, wind, and digital energy. Through this role, Nick was also a member of the BP Ventures Investment Committee, sponsoring several of BP's venture investment. Prior to this, Nick held senior roles as VP Competitor Intelligence and as Head of North America Investor Relations based in Houston. Nick's early career was spent in a variety of operational, technical, and commercial roles in the upstream business based offshore in the North Sea, Aberdeen, Algeria, and London. Nick holds a PhD in Mechanical Electrical Engineering and a degree in Mechanical Engineering, both from the University of Southampton. Nick is a chartered mechanical engineer and a fellow of both the Energy Institute and the Institution of Mechanical Engineering. Okay, the last part is my favorite, right? Now you're wondering what you wrote. Okay, Nick is passionate about creating an inclusive and supportive environment for working parents and carers, and was the executive sponsor for an active resource group at BP's St. James Square office. Nick also advises and mentors entrepreneurs in energy startup company. Outside of work, Nick enjoys running, cycling, yoga, and spending time with his wife Debbie and their two sons. That's the favorite part. That's what I meant. Okay, so with that, I would like to welcome Dr. Nick Wyeth, the Chief Executive Officer of Energy Institute UK, to deliver his, what do we call this, session, yeah? The topic about, we would like to hear from UK side about the net zero emissions by 2050. Maybe our region from here can learn a thing or two so that we can fast track our journey towards net zero carbon. And for the member of the audience, before Dr. Nick starts, if you have any question, just feel free to put it up in the chat. Yeah. With that, please, Nick, welcome.
Well, thank you so much for your very kind words, Dr. Amir. Salam alaikum, good afternoon to our distinguished speakers and indeed our moderator, and good afternoon to everyone joining, including the many fellows and members of the Energy Institute with us today. Thank you to UTP for hosting this excellent event. It's a pleasure to be here. Well, this year has certainly been a period in which energy and climate change haven't been far from the headlines. Whether it's rolling blackouts in California, record high gas prices and subsequent failure of energy companies here in Europe, and of course the increasingly devastating impacts from climate change seen around the world. But I'm also encouraged by the progress that we're making on the road to net zero. I was at COP26 last month and I'm genuinely optimistic about the prospects for meeting net zero, given the agreements that were struck. So today I want to focus on a number of pathways needed for a net zero future by 2050. Delivering a just transition to net zero is a genuine once in a generation opportunity that we must seize, which has the potential to create millions of jobs right across the energy sector if we act now and create a better future for all of society. So what are these pathways that are going to get us there? Well, first, I want to talk about the political pathway, specifically the action that we need from our politicians. The Paris Agreement in 2015 was an incredible achievement with that all-important 2-degree centigrade goal and a stretch to 1.5 degrees, which ultimately set the target and framed the discussions at Glasgow last month. While the outcome at COP26 was not as clear as many would have liked, it was nevertheless a landmark agreement. The rulebook from the Paris Agreement is now agreed, and crucially for the 1.5 degree goal. Countries have been asked to return next year at COP27 in Egypt with stronger commitments for 2030. Alongside multilateral agreements to rein in potent methane emissions, agreements on deforestation, on coal and mobilising the climate finance in economies around the world, and the all-important but not often mentioned Article 6. I'm encouraged by the necessary progress that's been made. The task at the feet of industry and government is now to step up and play their respective part in driving the highest level of ambition. This means working together to deliver further and faster emission reductions, but critically a just transition that works for all. Now, more than 100 countries have committed to reaching net zero emissions, including major markets such as the EU, US, China. And it was great to see the world's biggest oil exporter, Saudi Arabia, recently joining this group and pledging net zero by 2060. And I'm very pleased to hear about Malaysia's transition plans with increased renewable targets and the announcement that no new coal plants will be built going forward. And it was also fantastic to hear Mr. Bachu's comments on Petronas's very ambitious targets and the leadership that Petronas is taking. For Malaysia and Asia more generally, industry needs clear policies and a framework from which to plan. Uncertainty over meaningful carbon prices needed to support investment in emerging low carbon technologies, notably CCUS, needs further thought. Without progress in policy, Asia's future growth still looks too reliant on fossil fuels, particularly coal. But support for the acceleration of renewables, reducing fugitive emissions, investment in carbon capture and hydrogen, and a consensus around the role of natural gas to reduce coal use and oil in Asia are all signs of positive progress. And here in the UK, I'm certainly not saying it's job done. There are going to be hard to abate parts of the economy, the highest hanging fruit where policymakers will be challenged. Indeed, we may even need negative emission technology, but that's for another day. There are, however, moves towards greater ambition here in the UK. The UK's net zero strategy is an extremely important piece of policy, helping to set out scenarios for the UK to reach net zero in 2050. The government has also been looking at future-proofing the net zero workforce of tomorrow, which I'll talk on more in a moment, with the establishment of the Green Jobs Task Force. One of the key recommendations of that group, which I'm pleased to say the UK government has adopted, is for the creation of a cross-cutting skills delivery group, which will assess local support for workers and communities. Without a national skills strategy that underpins the development of low carbon energy and supply chains, we will not reach our net zero targets. So it's a hugely exciting time, and I'm encouraged by the irreversible direction of travel. But the climate crisis is a global crisis, and solutions need to be multifaceted. A one-size-fits-all or Western-centric approach going forward won't work. What struck me the most at COP26 was hearing the voice of indigenous peoples and countries directly impacted by climate change today. The climate crisis felt so much more real when I heard the Maldives Minister for Environment, Her Excellency Amanint Shauna, talk about the impacts of rising sea levels and bleaching of the coral reefs that surround the hundreds of Maldivian islands, and the eventual prospects of populations potentially having to move out of that country. Or hearing tribal elders from Brazil talking about the deforestation of the Amazon. In the global north, we need to be cognizant of the challenges faced elsewhere in the world, and this needs to be balanced with the understanding that curtailing business as usual emissions in some parts of the global south is compounded by the continuing need to extend access to energy and provide fast developing populations the way of life that we're used to in the developed world. Around 3 billion people today still depend on open fires or inefficient stoves for cooking their food. So we need to continue the necessary international political resolve to drive public and private investment into the clean energy system that we so desperately all want. That leads me to the second pathway, industry. There has been real conviction and belief from big players, even amongst some of the oil and gas players making their leap to net zero. In particular, some of the large integrated energy companies we know well, but also NOCs like Petrobras and indeed others in the Middle East. I believe that we're seeing some brave leadership, and that's placing value on achievement beyond the short-term bottom line that would have been achievable, unimaginable just a year ago. Here in the UK, Octopus Energy, led by the Energy Institute's Vice President Greg Jackson, is ploughing millions into heat pumps. By the end of the year, it intends to be recruiting heating technicians at the rate of 1,000 per year, and we expect heat pumps to more than halve in the coming years in price. Backed up by the UK's government recently announced grants for air source and ground source heat pumps. It should also help create the domestic manufacturing and supply chain to make that a reality. The recent hugely oversubscribed Crown Estate auction for seabed in offshore wind saw developers paying record high prices for wind acreage rather than offshore oil and gas exploration. These aren't fads, these are multi-billion pound investment decisions happening right here, right now. And it's not just large organisations, it's many medium and smaller players too. The Energy Institute is one of thousands of global organisations signed up to the UN's Race to Zero, committing to halve our emissions from our operations by 2030 and ending them entirely before 2050. Increasing requirements to report on emissions and act on energy efficiency and the possibility of greater enforcement of energy efficiency measures are also coming too. My third pathway is investment, and that's going to be crucial to delivering net zero. We need to understand the pressure points around climate finance and ensure that there is sufficient capital deployed where it needs to be into the right projects at the right time. BlackRock CEO Larry Fink has outlined that companies they invest in will need to show a game plan for surviving in the net zero world, fully integrated into their long-term strategy. Within the oil and gas sector, we've seen the insurgent pressure from activist investors taking on some of the largest energy companies in the world. I'm also very proud that the Energy Institute is a member of His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales Terra Carta Initiative, specifically the Sustainable Markets Initiative. We are working with industry players to help those industries address the energy transition, thinking about consumers and about the pace of deployment of new technologies. If we are to reach net zero, we are going to need sustained effort by industry and finance to shift the default setting and put sustainability at the centre of our investment decisions. My fourth pathway is about people and the workforce and skills that we all need. We put our faith in technologies, but technologies do not invent themselves. They are the work of teams, individuals, innovators, project designers, engineers, marketeers, and many others. We need to drive the knowledge and the expertise around energy systems in order to make this happen. And we need to call for change in policy, change in incentives, change in behaviour. None of these things can happen without people understanding the situation, generating ideas, building what they will believe will lead us to a low carbon energy system and a fairer, more just society. People are absolutely mission critical to our decarbonisation journey, people with the skills, knowledge and expertise required to bring about the transformation. Ingenious people, innovators, entrepreneurs, scientists, financiers, and of course engineers who have built the system that we have today and need to build a system of tomorrow. As I've said previously, shifting to low carbon at the same time as opening up access to the world's growing population is one of the most pressing challenges facing humanity. The good news is we have the skills that are transferable to the world we're already working in. Removing carbon from our energy systems, whether it's cleaning up fossil fuels with CCUS and hydrogen, or in the mass deployment of renewables, smart systems, many of the same skilled professionals are going to be relevant in the future. I'm a case in point. I started my career in oil and gas and eventually led BP strategy in renewables. And if we want to ensure a just transition, we've got to ensure the reskilling and repurposing happening. Otherwise, we risk professionals and their communities being left stranded. This was a clear call in the Energy Institute's 2021 Energy Barometer, our annual survey of energy professionals around our sector. A majority of existing professionals are planning to undertake training in the next year as a result of net zero, and almost half have concerns about the cost, time and availability of courses standing in the way of their skills development. Just over half are considering a move to a different field of energy, or have already made that move in the next decade. Low carbon fields, including energy and carbon management, wind power, hydrogen and CCUS, are singled out as preferred destinations. And a majority of our respondents point to investment in skills in the existing workforce as necessary to overcome the strong sense that communities are not disconnected from net zero. A laser focus on policies and initiatives to drive the development of low carbon technologies is absolutely vital, but it must not eclipse the equally important need to support and develop the existing workforce for the challenges that net zero will present. And we also need to attract many additional people into energy. It's not just about qualified engineers with degrees and PhDs. We need to see skilled apprentices for the scale of deployment needed. We often hear about the long lead times in building a new power plant, but the lead times required to bring on a heat pump installer or a wind turbine engineer from inspiring interest in STEM at schools through the necessary apprenticeship and degree and other qualifications takes even longer. Our Energy Barometer also clearly highlights that climate change is a motivating factor for new entrants to the industry, a real opportunity for our sector to attract the best and brightest from the next generation. And looking beyond just the technical roles, the energy transition is going to need skilled professionals across a myriad of disciplines, from behavioural change to data analytics, and of course lawyers and financiers, and many other professions. I'm proud that the Energy Institute is home to anyone with a stake in our energy future with a truly interdisciplinary outlook and approach. And that's going to be absolutely critical. Of the new green jobs required in the UK, National Grid estimate that around 250,000 roles will be roles that don't even exist today. None of this is going to happen by chance. The net zero workforce needs to be built with a clear plan and a programme of action starting now. My final pathway is around societal change. When talking about the future workforce, an equally important challenge we must address is the need to change the demographic of the industry. The progress of the energy sectors to date is frankly woeful. Fundamentally, our sector must better represent and reflect the society it serves. I'm a proud member of the Powerful Women, an organisation here in the UK supported by the Energy Institute that is working for greater representation of women at the top of the UK's energy industry. Their annual State of the Nation statistics reveal the mountain still left to climb on gender parity in the UK. Today, only 14% of executive director roles and 24% of board seats in the UK energy sector are held by women. Even more shockingly, some 78% of top UK energy companies have no women executive director, and nearly 30% have no women on their boards. These numbers are just not acceptable. And unfortunately, the challenge in the UK is indicative of the challenge all around the world. The business case for having gender parity is clear, but it's also intrinsically linked with our journey to net zero. We will only come up with the solutions to tackle this challenge if we harness all the talent that society has to offer. The UK's Climate Change Committee estimates that more than 60% of the emission reductions needed in the UK for net zero will involve some form of behavioural or societal change, often in combination with unfamiliar technology. How can we expect to bring about that societal change if we don't fully reflect and understand it ourselves? Clearly, addressing inequality in the industry doesn't just equate to improving gender diversity. We must take action across all dimensions of diversity: colour, race, sexuality, and of course those with disabilities. Our industry continues to innovate itself for net zero, so if we are truly to be fit for the future, drastic change is needed, and needed fast. So in conclusion, humanity is capable of so much, and our sector's achievements to date are proof of that. These past 18 months have been incredibly tough, individually for us and for our sector and for society, but together we have shown that bold action is possible. It's not been perfect, but we have responded to an existential threat with concerted action, and the same approach must continue to be applied as we strive for net zero. Decarbonisation of the global energy system won't happen at the necessary speed and scale without a critical focus on the pathways I've just mentioned. But I want to specifically reinforce that there's no credible pathway to net zero without people, our industry's workforce and its professionals. Perhaps our greatest challenge is how we tell the world about the difference we can make, the difference that a decentralised energy system can make, not just in keeping the lights on, but in transforming the lives and communities across the world. It's going to take the best and brightest to tackle these challenges, but what an opportunity awaits us. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. All right, so I believe that you have given a number of contacts to think about. Later during the Q&A, I hope to catch up with some of the items that you mentioned, like green jobs, gender parity, and so on. Yeah. Okay, next we will move on to our second speaker for today, Mr. Ibrahim Arifin. Okay, which is, let me just read up some information to introduce you to our audience today. Mr. Ibrahim Arifin is the Director, Energy Analyst, Strategic Planning Division of Sustainable Energy Development Authority, or we here in Malaysia, we usually just say SEDA, yeah? Then everybody knows. Sometimes people forgot what SEDA stands for, but they know SEDA. His role involves advisory on areas aimed to facilitate the growth of Malaysia's renewable and energy industry. Prior to SEDA, Mr. Ibrahim was a senior grid planning engineer in Tenaga Nasional Berhad, or TNB. In TNB, his experience in managing the integration of renewable energy projects into the national grid system provided the exposure to technical, commercial, and governance aspects of existing renewable energy mechanism in Malaysia, including net energy metering, feed-in tariff, and also large-scale solar, which are actually three of the many focus of SEDA, I believe. Yeah. So these are three portfolios that is related to Encik Ibrahim's experience. With that, I would like to invite Mr. Ibrahim Arifin to share his thoughts today with us on the topic of sustainable energy landscape in Malaysia. Mr. Ibrahim.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Mila. If I may project my slide first. Hope everyone can see my slides. So first of all, Assalamualaikum, good afternoon and good morning for everyone on board. Dr. Mila, Mr. Bacho, Professor Shahi, Dr. Nick and Dr. Sharina, and ultimately ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. So first of all, thank you for having us, SEDA Malaysia, on board to this remarkable events with regards to the topic itself. So in particular, I have a self-interest in terms of this transition itself, because as we know that as the climate change agenda are developing, and also there are a lot of talks about going high on renewable energy, sustainable energy. In particular, they are always like putting fingers in terms of what's next for the oil and gas sector. So ultimately, being from the engineer background and doing the grid system management, I would say that the fossil fuel plants, thermal plants has been contributed towards ensuring a reliable electricity supply to Malaysia, all customers, for many and many years. So ultimately, we need to put really concentration on what will be the future of the oil and gas, and in particular the fossil fuel markets in general. So if I may, just a little bit of presentations, so to allow me. So before I go into more details, just a bit of introduction about SEDA Malaysia. Just a bit, we are established on the 1st September 2011 under the SEDA Act 2011. So recently we also just celebrating our 10-year anniversary, and we are the statutory body under the Ministry of Energy and Natural Resources, and these are the key functions that we hold. And if I may summarize, basically that the main role is to facilitate and develop the renewable energy industry in Malaysia. So with regards to the SEDA Malaysia, as mentioned by Dr. Mila as well, like when we're talking about SEDA, sometimes people have the perception that SEDA stands for Solar Energy Development Authority, but rest assured that it's not focusing just on solar. We are talking about sustainable energy. And when we're talking about sustainable energy, it actually governs bigger things, which covers both the renewable energy and also the energy efficiency, energy conservation. So first of all, why we want to go for the sustainable development? These are the main three objectives. First of all is to maintain the level of comfort that we have today for our future generations. So for our children and our grandchildren, whatever the level of comfort we have today, as much as possible, we want to make sure that they also have the same, even if not more, in terms of the comfort level. And the next one is in terms of the affordability itself, to drive the cost optimization and efficiency. So this is with regards to the economy, especially during this pandemic and post-pandemic situation. We really need to think about the impact to our economic growth. And ultimately, it's with regards to the environmental preservations, or in short, I would say that we need to strike a good balance with regards to this energy trilemma with all these three items: the environmental, targets and policies, affordability, and also the system stability. So my presentation will be on two parts. So first of all, I will just try to reiterate most of the items already been covered during the keynote speech and also the opening remarks, but just try to put in context with regards to the global agenda and how Malaysia are doing on this. So first of all, I'd just like to share that global warming is getting real. So based on the report by Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change recently in August 2021, we would say that the issues has become more significant, as mentioned by Mr. Bacho as well. A lot of issues with regards to the social impacts, displacement of citizens, water level risings that impacts the island countries, for example, and the weather condition itself. So ultimately, we can see that there are a lot of forest fire, drought happening globally. We as Malaysian might not feel the impact directly to us, but if we can really anticipate what happening in this year, early this year, there are a lot of flooding happening in Kedah, in Pahang, and these two events itself has been displacing a lot of numbers of families have been impacted. Roughly in Pahang itself, about 40,000 of families are already impacted by the flooding in Pahang, And if we see that this kind of event have become more and more frequent over the years, so ultimately we might not feel the direct impact at the moment, but if we maintain our business as usual, maintain our current behavior, this might come to us sooner than what we expected. This just to say that this climate change has the direct impact to our social and economics. So if I may quote the remarks by the World Bank that the greenhouse gas emissions are the biggest mistake that the world market has ever seen. So these are the few things that might occur. Some countries already feel this directly, especially during for the food security, social security, and also the extreme meteorological phenomenon. So if I may reiterate that, for example, since 2015, our meteorological department itself have a difficulty to forecast the weather for even the day ahead, or even more for the week ahead. For example, it has become more and more unpredictable, and hence this also impact the business operations of a lot of private sectors itself. So social impacts and economic impacts that we might be facing if we didn't address the climate change agenda properly. And as mentioned also, the Paris Climate Agreement is a global agenda and was have the first sitting in 2015, and 199 countries already participate under these Paris agreements, and Malaysia is also one of the participating countries. And with regards to this, we have commit to reduce our carbon intensity by 45% in 2030. Just to mention that previously back in 2015, the target is actually 35% in 2030, and assuming that we have some financial assistance from outside, we are able to increase our commitment to 45%. But earlier this year, that we already committing the unconditional 45% target by 2030. So with regards to these directions, and also the recent announcement by our Prime Minister that we are going for the carbon neutral earliest 2015, we can anticipate that there are a lot of more transformation required, business changes required to address and to deliver our commitments. And with regards to this, the United Nations also has established a number of sustainable development goals, or in short, we call it SDG. And in particular for power sector, these are the 5 key areas that we are looking into addressing while growing the renewable energy industry in Malaysia. Say that the carbon emissions, I would say that the recent years, all along, all fingers are pointing more in terms of the power sector. I would say power sector or electricity sector. Most are focusing on power sector itself, but I would say that the contribution of this carbon actually goes cross-sectoral. All industry have play a role in terms of these carbon emissions. So if you can see based on the global trends, these are the 5 key industries that contribute towards these carbon emissions. If you can see that the land use contribute about 24% globally, and this also include the deforestation. So the industry itself, the transportations, as we can see that in Malaysia in particular, a lot of cars are still relying on normal conventional cars, and there are a lot of talks about transitioning into electric vehicles, hydrogen fuel cells vehicles, for example. But yet, there are a lot of sentiments, including the affordability and the infrastructure readiness to make this transition happening. So at the moment, we still see a lot of fossil fuel cars out there, and this also contribute towards these emissions issues. Buildings and also the energy itself. So when we're talking about energy, mainly the oil and gas sector and the power sector are the two that contribute towards these energy contributors of carbons. So as much as it has the highest contributor, but it also provides the biggest potential for this decarbonization agenda. You can see that over the years also, the private sectors are aligning their strategic path towards sustainability. So as mentioned by Mr. Bacho also during his keynote address, Petronas has become one of the national giants, the first I would say that committed to this NZCE 2015. And following from Petronas, Tenaga Nasional, Maybank, Sandabi and Malaysia Berhad also has committed to this NZCE 2015, and this is also same goes for the regional national giants and also the global players. So if you can see that most of the parties, organizations that committing to this NZCE also not only coming from power sector, is cover also from the oil and gas sector, financing sectors, and also the transportation sectors. So these are become the global agenda, and Malaysia is also part of it. And hopefully that together with the right collaboration and synergize from all entities, we are able to deliver our commitments and play a part to save the environment. The next on the sustainable energy in Malaysia, and I will be focusing more in terms of the power sector itself. And why power sector? Because I would say that the total of the oil and the power sector itself have become one of the major end users for the oil and gas itself. So during my next few slides, I am able to share with you some of information with regards to the power sector. So when we're talking about the electricity supply industry, it always goes with regards to these two items, the demand and supply side. So first of all, I would like to deliberate more in terms of the demand side. So ultimately, our electricity demand is anticipating about 2% of annual growth and driven by economic activities. And on top of that, with regards to the annual population growth, around 1.5%. So we can see that the electricity demand is increasing over the years. And with the increase of electricity demand, there always a need for additional capacity from the generation itself to provide this electricity to the end users. And if we're looking at the mix of the electricity demands, 22% are coming from domestic, and the biggest consumers are the industrial sectors. And when we highlight about these industrial sectors, as much as it provides the economic benefits to the nation, it also emit quite a significant numbers of carbon due to its business processes. So, and on the other sides, on the supply side, my apology because I just quoted the figure from 2016, but it did not change much over these few years, especially due to the COVID situations. And I would say that currently about 40%, this on the Peninsula Malaysia, we are still relying about 40% from coal itself. And as we know that coal are the most contributed to this carbon emissions in the power sector, followed by about 50% from natural gas and 11% from hydro. And we have a positive target for RE penetrations. And coming from now, we have already like few mechanism in place in which I will deliberate more in my next few slides. So when we're talking about this demand and supply, the focus are now more focusing on the supply side, in which the renewable energy, solar projects, biogas projects, hydro projects is mainly catering only on the supply side. But as much as we reduce the carbon from the supply side and not maintaining on the demand side itself, the things will later on just offsetting each other, and later on we might not be able to reach our targets, and we are maintaining our status quo. Because as we decarbonize the supply side, we also need to decarbonize on the demand side itself. So hence, as we're talking about sustainable energy, it always goes on the both spectrum, in which the energy efficiency and energy conservation is to tackle more on the demand side, whereas on the supply side is on the renewable energy side. If we are looking in terms of the trending for the past 20 years, so you can see that the natural gas in particular have already like dominated the energy mix in the power sector. So if we can see back in early 1990s until about 2000, most of the capacity are still relying on diesel, distillate, for example, and oil. But post 2000, there are more growth in terms of the natural gas demands. And same goes for Sabah and Sarawak. But in particular for Sarawak, if we can see from the graph that post 2010, a lot of the capacity from the oil and gas is reduced for the power sector and being displaced by large hydro capacity. So if we can see that there are numbers of large hydro in Sarawak, including Bakun and Murum, these contributed about 60% of their electricity capacity towards meeting their electricity demand. And for Sabah itself, natural gas remains as one of the key dominant fuel in terms of the power, in terms of producing the energy required for electricity. So I would say that moving forward, these are what the past 20 years trending, and if we can anticipate what's the next 20 years of happening. So if you can see that these are the new plant up of the generation plants and also the plant retirement. So if you can see from year to year basis, there are significant numbers of gas-fired plants that will be decommissioning due to the end of its commercial arrangement, power purchase agreements. But at the same time, there also will be an additional new capacity from natural gas from year to year. So looking forward, I would say that there are still a lot of prospects for natural gas and the key of the strategies towards decarbonize the power sector is more in terms of phasing down the reliance on coal and displacing by natural gas and renewable energy. So you can see that the numbers of RE, just to mention that Malaysia being located in the equator, we are blessed with a lot of renewable energy potentials, mainly from solar, mainly from hydro and biogas also. But I would say that there are a lot of talks about going RE 100%. Yes, we do have the technical potential of going RE 100%, but this might not be able to address in terms of the system security and system stability. And also this might have a significant impact towards our economy if we are totally displacing the fossil fuel itself. So I would say that the gas-fired plant will remain relevant moving forward, not just as a generation source, generation capacity in meeting the electricity demand. It's also to make sure that the economic activities can proceed and did not disrupt any development towards on the nation itself. So with regards to the renewable energy journey, this year also marks our 20th journey in terms of embarking on renewable energy agenda. It was started back in 2001 when we introduced this small renewable energy power program, SREP. And during this time, the renewable energy resources that we are looking into more in terms of the bioenergy and also the small hydro development. But however, after 10 years of launching of this program, at the end of December 2010, only roughly about less than 1% of capacity mix, or I would say 60 megawatt of capacity renewables being realized. And this is relatively still low from the initial targets that we have. So in 2010, Ministry and also regulators are coming up with this National Renewable Energy Policy and Action Plan, in which we are targeting for a growth of renewable energy in the capacity mix 5% by 2020. And moving forward, we are aiming for about 19% in 2025. But and in order to achieve these targets, first of all, we have introduced this feed-in tariff program in 2011. Just a little bit of introduction on this feed-in tariff mechanism. It is mainly, if we're looking into our electricity bills, there is this 1.6% surcharge in our electricity bills. This 1.6% actually goes to this one RE fund. And by this RE fund, we utilize the fund to promote and develop the renewable energy projects in Malaysia. So under this feed-in tariff mechanism, the successful quota holders are able to enjoy a premium tariff, mainly to support the high cost of renewable energy integration in the system. So in 2011, the feed-in tariff has been officiated, and the 4 main renewable resources that we explored already extend from the small hydro to bioenergy and also the solar itself. And in 2014, we have also included geothermal as one of the potentials to be explored and to be developed. And after about 5 years of implementation this feed-in tariff program, significant numbers of projects have been in place. Roughly under the feed-in tariff programs, about 10,000 of numbers of projects focusing on solar projects from small scale to bigger scales have been in place. And this also have spurred the growth of local manufacturer, local SMEs that provide services on the solar project itself. And due to this trending and also the global trendings, the price of the solar also have reduced significantly. In 2010, I would say that the cost of installing the 1 kilowatt of solar capacity is roughly about 12 to 13,000 ringgit Malaysia. But in 2016, the price has fallen down almost to about 5,000 to 6,000 ringgit. So we can see a significant reduction of the cost, about 50% from 2010 to 2016. And if you're looking at the latest pricing, it has reduced furthermore. And I would say that the current price about 3,000 to 4,000 per kilowatt. So this see a significant reduction, about 70% from the baseline of 2010. And 2016, all the quota under the FIT for solar already fully taken up. And this has been displaced by 3 other mechanisms, the large-scale solar, net energy metering, and also Celco. And these 3 programs are focusing only on solar capacity itself. So from 2017 onwards, we are leveraging on these three programs to further promote and accelerate the solar growth of the capacity, while the FIT remains to push and promote for the other renewable resources that includes the bioenergy and also the hydro. So as of December 2020, we already realized 24% of renewable capacity in Malaysia. That translates to roughly about 8.4 gigawatt, 8,400 megawatt, and this see a significant growth from where we are in 2010. And moving forward, I would say that this year also we have revised our national target. As mentioned, like previously, we are only looking at about 20% of renewable by 2025. But this year we have revised the targets, looking at the current progress that we have and the agreement to include large hydro as our renewable capacity mix. And we have increased the target to 31% in 2025, that equivalent to about 13 gigawatt, and also 40% in 2035. So if we see as of December 2020 and where we are trying to heading to 2035, we still have about 10 gigawatt of renewable capacity that we try to develop and realize by then. Next, just to share a bit on this initiative that already in place. So as mentioned again, that when we're talking about sustainable energy, it's always about the renewable energy and also the energy efficiency. So if I may go a bit on details on these parts. So on the renewable energy, these are the four main programs towards promoting for renewable energy: the feed-in tariff, large-scale solar, net energy metering, and Celco. For each of these programs, they have their own uniqueness. They have its own pricing mechanism. They have their own commercial arrangements. So for more details, you may approach us anytime to understand more in terms of these four mechanisms. And I would say that looking at what we have realized in December 2020, the 8.4 gigawatt of capacity, the most dominant contributors still coming from hydro, and next solar capacity itself. And from the energy efficiency side, we also have provide a facilitation and certifications for commercial and industrial buildings. So if you know that we've heard about Green Building Index, for example, we have also this program that is called the Green Pass. This is to drive the commercial and industrial sector towards a low carbon buildings, or best the zero energy buildings. And we have also established in-house this BEDOS system. It's the basically building energy database online system. This is enable any commercial or industrial sector to monitor their electricity consumptions and their carbon emissions impact within this online platform. And recently, if we heard that we also have launched the SAFE 2.0 earlier this year. The SAFE 2.0, as per the name itself, sustainability achieved via energy efficiency. This is a rebate scheme in which promoting for anyone that would like to purchase for electrical appliance. And under the SAFE 2.0 is limited for air conditioning and also fridge that have a high rating stars. And for those that purchase these items, they are entitled for a rebate scheme of 200 ringgit. So just to mention that this is also like on top of spurring the economic activities, this also intends to increase the awareness and educate the masses in terms of the energy efficiency itself. So just to as a heads up, next month we will be also launching the SAFE 3.0 continuation from this program, and more appliances will be covered under the SAFE 3.0. So look forward for the announcement. And if you have the intention to purchase any electrical appliances, I may recommend that you wait until next month. So next on the EACG, Energy Audit Conditional Grants. So in understanding our electricity consumptions, our energy behavior, these are the first step that always become the first initial steps, which is the energy audit. So by having this energy audit, it will make the premise owner, the facilities, any organizations to understand more in terms of what are their consumption behavior. And by understanding their consumption behavior, we can facilitate and also design a customized solutions in terms of how we want to manage their energy consumptions. So these energy audit conditional grants are still available. So if you have friends or any organizations that would like to understand more and be part of this energy audit conditional grant, feel free, as the quota is still a lot more available. This in terms of the renewable energy and the energy efficiency. So if you want to go for a more bigger scales, So I would say that these are another initiative that conducted by SEDA, Low Carbon Cities, or we call it GTALCC, which is the Green Technology Applications for Low Carbon City. And this is in collaboration with UNDP and also the GEF, in which we are trying to facilitate the urban development towards become more sustainable and low carbon development. So just to mention that under this initiative, a lot of local councils, including DBKL, Dewan Bandaraya Kuala Lumpur, Iskandar region also has formulated their sustainability roadmap based on the guidelines provided under this mechanism. So with regards to this is to address the carbon emissions from the building sectors, and looking forward that with regards to this roadmap by DBKL and IRDA, for example, this also pave a directions towards how we want to develop our new buildings, new structures in the future. And last but not least, especially towards driving this agenda, the human capital always become the key assets in terms of ensuring that we are able to make this kind of sustainable development. So with regards to the human capital, SEDA Malaysia also provide a training with regards to renewable energy and also energy efficiency. And just to share with you also that recently in the past few months, we have also engaged with PETRONAS in terms of reskilling the current vendors in terms of towards these directions. So next, I would say that the energy transitions require proper transition plan in ensuring the energy trilemma, the pyramid shown in my earlier slides, the environmental, the affordability, and also the system security can be addressed collectively and able to realize our national aspirations. And as mentioned in my earlier slide also, that we are still relying about 80% of our electricity demand. And if I may focus in terms of this index, so if you can see that with regards to the horizontal axis is mainly with regards to the quality of our electricity supply, and the vertical index are more in terms of the affordability itself, our tariff price, electricity tariff. So if you can see that the electricity tariff in Malaysia are relatively affordable and I would say cheap compared to other developed nations, and we have a quality of while maintaining the affordability at the lower range, we are also able to ensure a high reliability and high quality of the electricity supply itself, on par with the developed nation itself. And this is actually thanks to the contribution from the fossil fuel that include both this natural gas and also the coal itself. So these are the key dominants that enable Malaysia to provide a cheap electricity to all. But moving forward, this also like when we increase the penetration from the renewable energy, I would say that even though the price is declining over the years, but still there are a lot of other technical concerns with regards to, for example, for the solar itself. The technology of solar itself have become more cheaper over the years, but due to the intermittency of the solar itself, it requires a more enhancement of the grid. It requires technology to manage the intermittency. And usually we heard about the battery energy storage, for example. But at the moment, this technology, even though the technology are available, but the price are still on the higher sides. And by transitioning fully towards these directions, it will definitely have the impact to the electricity tariff. So as much as possible, as much as we want to make a progressive change towards this energy transition, we also want to make a cautious effort and learn from other countries that already like embark this ahead of time. For example, from the Energy Institute, the UK market, for example, these are a lot more to learn and to make sure that this energy transition, as much as possible, will not impact the affordability of the electricity itself. And the area of concerns, if I may also like dwell into these 4 items. The first of all, the stranded assets. I would say that PETRONAS and UTP understand more in terms of what happens if there is the sector itself being displaced. But in particular, during my session today, I would like to focus more in terms of the grid infrastructure. There are a lot of billions ringgits of investment has been made to develop the grid infrastructure connecting and dedicating to thermal plants. So if we are to displace the fossil fuel plants from the energy mix, what will happen to all this investment and how we want to recover all these costs? So as mentioned that billions of ringgits already invested, and if we are to do not monitor the impact of this investment made, this might have a significant impact to our economic growth. And next is in terms of the impact to the electricity tariff itself. So as we are moving towards, if we are displacing the coal, and ultimately, let's say if we are to displace the fossil fuel entirely, this definitely have the impact to the tariff, and this might impact not only on the, I would say from the TNB revenue, it will also impact for every one of us from residential, commercial, industrial sectors. This will have a significant impact on their business operations. And next, on the job security, I would say that over the years, we have developed a lot of skills, engineers, skilled experts that with regards to the oil and gas sectors. So this human capital development, if we are to transition towards this more green agenda, what will happen to the job security in terms of during this line? We may say that the reskilling always the pathway, but I would say that some people might have a challenge with regards to this reskilling, especially for those that already like very seasoned. I would say that post 50 years old, post 60 years old, sometimes when they are trying to reskill, they might be a bit constrained for them to be able to grasp with the current situations. So with regards to the job security, as much as possible, we want to create the more employments with regards to the renewables. We also must make sure that the security jobs from the fossil fuel can be maintained and provide an alternative for them as well. And on the next item, in terms of the emerging technology, I would say that this is also one of the moving forward, as mentioned by Mr. Bacho and also the sharing by Dr. Nick just now. There are a lot of potentials on how we want to harmoniously living renewables and fossil fuel. So for example, like for natural gas itself, if I may take a step back, if you're looking at the coal sector, for example, rather than displacing entirely on the coal capacity, there are few technologies that can be able to reduce the carbon emission from the coal and make it more green. For example, the carbon capture, the co-firing with the coal itself. If I can make an example of a few plants in Japan, for example, they already like integrating their coal plants with introduction of 1% of biomass, then increase to 30% of biomass, 70% coal. And there are also some success stories about converting fully from the 100% of the coal plants to the biomass plants. So this is always one of the technology that can be considered in terms of the co-firing technologies, carbon capture technology as well, and clean coal technology. So these are part of the technology that has been emerged also to make sure that the fossil fuel, rather than be displaced, they can become more greener and play an important role for the future development of Malaysia itself. And with regards to natural gas, this also apply the same goes for natural gas as well, because we also have a lot of potential on technologies. When we're talking about, just now when we're talking about co-firing from the coal, we also have the blending technology with the natural gas, in which in line with the direction from Petronas also. Currently, they are also leading the way for green hydrogen productions, and this always become one of the alternative in terms of blending in with the natural gas to make the emissions become more cleaner and reduce. And we have technology carbon capture and the clean energy, the natural gas itself is definitely emits less carbon compared to other fossil fuels. So I would say that this emerging technology need also a careful transition, careful considerations to make sure that both the renewables energy and fossil fuel can synergize and live harmoniously within the power sector itself. So this will be my second last slide. The key takeaways, the first of all, is to increase the awareness. So as much as possible, I would say that the private sectors out there, I would say that mostly people might think that this is just another business potential, business opportunities, but it actually goes beyond that. It has the value potentials towards environmental, social benefits, and also our governance. So a lot of companies also have their ESG goals, targets, directions, and sustainable energy can play a significant role in addressing their ESG targets. And the next one, in terms of the potentials, as mentioned just now, the existing mechanism of renewable energy and energy efficiency, I would say that it is only a tip of the iceberg. There are a lot more potentials, and it can go beyond energy. It can also be a part of the industrial processes, heating and cooling purposes. For example, for the refinery process, the solar thermal can play a significant role in terms of providing the required heat for their processes. So this is also one of the area that is not currently available in Malaysia, but these are the opportunity that can be explored by collaboration between entities. And I would say that towards an effective decarbonization directions, RE potential can facilitate on other sector needs as well, beyond power sector and beyond energy sector. So if you are looking in terms of the trending from this resource IEA, I would say that 51% of the renewable potentials are used for the thermal processes, and 32% goes for the transportations, and about 17% is actually coming from the power sector itself. So if you can see that the potential from renewables actually goes beyond power and energy sector, it can go cross sectors and provide a lot more potentials to all. And last one is on the transition itself, the smooth transition from current landscape to ensure the sustainability of the energy transition phase towards addressing the climate change. So with regards to the announcement by our Prime Minister that we are going for carbon neutral, some may ask how we want to do it, how we want to transition to this phase towards this carbon neutral. I would say that a lot of things need to be done, a lot of things need to be further discussed and collaborate in terms of make sure that this transition will not disrupt any existing business and it can provide more value adds to the nation. So this is my concluding remarks. I would say that the energy transition phase is an indeed interesting phase that myself also have been involved in the energy sector about 14 years. And I would say that this particular since 2016 has marked a really interesting phase with all this inception of renewable energy projects. A lot of things need to be done. I would say that internally we also developing our own capacity and competency to make sure that this transition provide good values for all. And the energy transition phase also has been identified as one of the main economic recovery post-pandemic. So I would say that we have a positive outlook of RE growth in Malaysia, and based on the national targets that I mentioned about 31% by 2025, we have these estimations conducted by this based on this one study that we are currently conducting, the Malaysia Renewable Energy Roadmap. We are planning to launch this document in January 2022. And based on the assessment done within this context, we expected about 20 over billions ringgit worth of investment need to be invested to realize the renewable energy targets. And this also will unlock roughly about 30,000 numbers of job employments to all. So hopefully that by having this kind of energy transition phase, we only not able to address the climate agenda, we are also able to unlock the economic and also the social economic benefits to all. So thank you. This is just my personal information. You may feel free to contact me at any time to further discuss on this. So thank you. Pass back to Dr. Mila.
Thank you very much, Ibrahim. Okay, I believe we have had a very good two presentations today from both our speakers. Just to give, I believe now we will have 2 minutes economic break, Nick. In the meantime, let both speakers can have a look at the question in the chat box. I believe some of the questions really do need your attention. Meanwhile, we take about maybe 2 minutes break. Yeah? Back at 4:40. Start our second session on the Q&A. Okay. All right, so welcome back to the Q&A session, our part 2 of today's session. Mr. Ibrahim is here. Dr. Nick, could you please turn on your camera, and we shall start by addressing the question from members of the floor. I'm not sure if we can address everybody's question within the next 20 minutes, but I will try to pick up some of the questions that maybe we can start from the first one from Faiz. Yeah. Perhaps this is for Dr. Nick. From drilling departments, you've seen the question, Nick?
I have seen the question. I haven't got it in front of me right now, but I guess. Would you mind repeating the question, please?
Yeah, I believe that he's saying that Faiz is saying he's from Wells Drilling Department. Coming from the core discipline of the fossil fuel, the group has always been the subject to do the most or lead any initiatives regards to decarbonization. So they have aligned their world-class well delivery goals to the net zero carbon emission targets, venturing into new technology for hydrocarbon or alternate base for our drilling. And what else can he do, basically, he's asking.
Well, look, I think that, the first thing to say is it's fantastic from the phases, the work that's been done in Petronas to reduce the emissions from existing hydrocarbon production. I think for gas to play a role in the transition, it has to manage its own emissions. And we all know the facts around methane emissions. I mentioned earlier the action that was taken at COP on this. So these are absolutely the right things to be doing. And indeed, my own organisation, the Energy Institute, does a lot of technical work across the industry. We are part of the Methane Guiding Principles initiative, and so certainly very happy to connect with Petronas and see if we can help you on that. I think clearly, as we think about sort of decarbonisation of those hydrocarbons, CCUS has to play a role as well, potentially blue hydrogen and other forms of transferring what would otherwise emit CO2 molecules into lower carbon forms of energy. So I think this is a really important point. We've talked a lot about LNG today as well, and that's an area where, at best, LNG can be a really important part of the transition. At worst, if it has methane emissions along the production, distribution, transportation, and end use, then LNG can be worse than coal. So we really need to get the right actions in place to better manage the existing production of natural gas, and I'm very happy to help any more that we can.
Yeah, that's great, because now that with Energy Institute Malaysia, the chairman is also from Universiti Teknologi PETRONAS, I believe this can be put together as a package in order to help our national oil company Petronas to be able to, find ways to do more in our commitment towards the net zero carbon emissions. Yeah,
we'd be delighted, absolutely delighted to work more closely with Petronas. So very happy to help.
That's great. Okay, moving to the next one is from Anko Ahluwalia from HSSE Petco. This one is, are there any plans and tariff plan for encouraging renewable maritime energy net zero GHG emission in the Malacca Straits?
I see. If I may respond to this, Jamila. So I would say that with regards to the renewable maritime energy, it might cover a lot of areas. For example, it might explore the potentials of OTEC, ocean technology, or it might also involve the implementation of utilizing the decommissioning plants, oil rigs offshore for renewable energy projects. So at the moment, we are also discussing quite often with the new energy division in Petronas in terms of how best we can utilize the oil rigs to provide the renewable energy capacity to the grid system onshore. But the challenges remain high as to build the electricity connections from the oil rigs, which are located quite a significant distance from the onshore, and this usually impedes the development of oil rigs to supply for the national grid itself. But ultimately, we also like at the current frameworks, at best we are trying to facilitate with regards on how they can develop this kind of potentials, utilizing the decommissioning oil rigs to provide the renewable energy capacity from the oil rigs within the network of the offshore. So ultimately, I would say that currently the oil rigs might be operated by gas or diesel or oil, for example, and replacing to renewable energy capacity might able to reduce some numbers of emissions from these oil rigs. And I would say, in particular, I would say that there is no particular plan for particular area. For example, the Malacca Straits, as mentioned earlier, that we have the national targets. This is set by the federal level, and as much as possible next year, we are planning to go for a roadshow for all states to set a state target with regards to these aspirations. So at the moment, I would say that Sarawak, Sabah, they have their own RE targets, but in Peninsular Malaysia, the targets are not really there, state level. So we will try to, we have some plans for next year to embark and start discussing with the state governments to have this kind of targets with regards to their locality.
Okay. Right, that's great to know because I myself is in the decommissioning of offshore platforms. And there are researchers here at UTP looking at the potential of solar on the offshore platforms, wind or even wave energy, yeah, that kind of thing. So that's another one, very interesting question. Somebody was asking, Sarawak has 2 hydro, right? Bakun and Murung. However, still most interior area are still without electricity.
Okay.
Why?
Maybe later on Dr. Nick can share with regards to if there any condition on this in UK. But in Malaysia, in Sarawak in particular, I would say that the concern is still in terms of the grid infrastructure. So based on the rural electrification, usually their electricity demand are not really high, whereas the distance from the existing grid infrastructure is very long. Some areas are about 100 kilometers away. So if you want to have a dedicated line investing about 100 kilometers of grid infrastructure to the rural electrifications, this might incur a lot of investment, whereas the uptakes are not really there. So for Sarawak, for example, the utility, the Sarawak Energy Berhad, and also the Ministry of Utility of Sarawak have embarked on the more in terms of the corporate social responsibility, the CSR initiative, to install the localized solar capacity to provide the electrifications for the rural areas. So I would say that under the RMK, the 11 Malaysian Plan and 12 Malaysian Plan, we are targeted about 40,000 numbers of households are able to be electrified through these CSR projects. And just to mention that for these rural electrifications, usually it's we are intended for a more like off-grid systems, and this initiative is undertaken by the KPLB, Kementerian Pembangunan Luar Bandar. I would say that this is the Kementerian Luar Bandar. So this I would say that these are the limitations. It's mainly on the grid infrastructure readiness. So currently, even though the capacity from the Bakun and Murum is way high from the local demands, but the limitations are still goes back to the availability of the grid infrastructure.
Understood. Nick, would you like to comment on this one?
Well, I won't say much on hydro. I mean, hydro is a relatively small part of the UK energy mix, but it does play a very important role, particularly when one thinks about pumped hydro. And I think as we think about, and you talked about it in your presentation, Dr. Ibrahim, on the variability of renewables, and clearly pumped hydro provides a very important role in helping manage that and creating capacities that are typically far greater than any battery can currently provide.
Okay. To be fair, I will jump to the next question because the other question is also to Seda. So Dr. Nick will not be able to answer that one. So I will jump to the next question, which is actually by our own Vice Chancellor of UTP, Professor Ibrahim. So you can see here the transition to more renewable and sustainable clean technologies en route to net zero carbon would require significant investment. There are some quotes stating as high as 3 times magnitude of investment needed. Given the current tight condition on world financial situation, what do you see as an option way forward to fund the investment needed? Maybe I'll ask Nick first, yeah?
Well, Professor Ibrahim, thank you for the question. I mean, to me, I am not at all worried about the ability to get the level of finance we need for the transition. That, you know, there are literally hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars that is looking to be deployed into this transition. What I would say is the critical thing is, as I said before, is getting that investment into the right projects at the right time in the right place. And I think in order to do that, we need to think about the conditions that allow renewable projects in particular and other forms of transition technologies to be bankable. And we've seen that play out in developed economies around wind and solar, where the characteristics of those projects, long-dated projects that provide a steady return, that don't have the risk of commodity prices as we have in oil and gas, it provides an almost perfect investment vehicle to fund pensions, where people are looking for sort of a 20-year annuity. And so I think that the challenge is not so much, you know, getting the capital there, it's allowing developing countries to access that capital and effectively making their projects bankable. And in order to do that, what's really important is the regulatory frameworks around energy transition projects are seen as stable, reliable, and something that the investment community can rely on. And that, to a large degree, is why the UK has been so successful in the build out of offshore wind. The regulations around the pricing of offshore wind are enshrined in law. They can't be changed if a new political party comes into power, and so that investors know that if they've got a price on offshore wind or indeed solar or wind, that price will be honoured over a 15-year or more in some cases period. So I think that's the critical point I would make.
Okay, thank you. What about you, Mr. Ibrahim?
I totally concur with Dr. Nick, because I would say that there are a lot of investors that are interested to support renewable energy projects, either from local or foreign. So I would say that the United States, UK also have extended their funding of projects to Malaysia also, to provide financing for any renewable energy projects. But if I may dwell a bit further in terms of the local context, that this also have been raised by a lot of during the stakeholder engagements. So I would say that the first of all, I would say Bank Negara itself, our Malaysia banks, also have already come up with this one value-based intermediary assessment framework, BBIAF in short. It's basically to educate more in terms of from the financial sectors with regards to the risk exposure with regards to financing the renewable energy projects, and hence able to understand more in terms of the project and able to provide a better financing scheme. From this initiative, a lot of banks, for example, UOB, Hong Leong, also have already a dedicated unit to manage for financing or the green financing. And they also extending a lot of customized financing scheme for renewable energy with a low interest rate. And on top of that, I would say in terms of supporting for the financial investment required for these transitions, other partners, for example, our MIDA, Malaysia Investment Development Authority, they have also these two programs which call the GITA and GITE. This is to provide the tax allowance and tax exemptions for those who participate under this green initiative. So these are one of the financial relief that can benefits for the players. And recently also they have announced the Green Technology Financing Scheme 3.0 managed by Green Tech. And this also provide a dedicated financing for renewable energy projects. So I would say that this kind of initiative already in place, and moving forward, we are also collaborating to understand more in terms of the new market models, new sentiments. The situation might be true, I would say, back in 2015, 2016, where a lot of financial sectors have some reservations with regards to provide good financing to the renewable energy projects. But over these years, I would say that this gap already been mitigated, and now we can see that a lot of banks provide a good financing scheme for this kind of projects.
That's great to know that there are actually actions coming into play, because I was reading about COP26. Since Nick, you attended the COP 26, and they were saying that no agreement was actually reached with regards to finance, and the previous Green Climate Fund promised to fund about 100 billion per year by 2020 to the developing countries in order to take up all these initiatives towards carbon neutral. But very small amount was disbursed. So now that COP26 has concluded and people are talking about COP27 in Egypt next year, on finance itself, what actually is there for developing countries?
Well, I think, I mean, it's disappointing that it's taken that long to not complete that funding round. I mean, this in 20, the gap of 20 billion is a lot of money by any imagination, but actually in terms of the transition, it is a decimal place. And I think, to me, that is something that does need to be resolved, and ultimately developing countries need to play, the developed countries need to play their role in supporting developing countries make this transition. I'd also come back to the previous points about just creating the right conditions to attract investment. I mean, that fund is important, but what's actually going to drive the transition are the trillions of dollars that will go into the entire energy transition over the next 20, 30 years.
Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, there are actually a lot of things that we need to talk about, but just now the time has already indicated that we only have 5 minutes. Actually now less than 5 minutes. So maybe if you have time, then probably the question you can take time to address in the chat box. Otherwise, maybe from each of you, key takeaway before we close our session for the day. I'll start with Mr. Ibrahim.
Okay, so thank you. I would say hopefully like this kind of events like today are able to cross and to close the gap between sectors, between parties, because like moving forward, this carbon neutral is about cross-sectoral targets. So with regards to our commitment to go for carbon neutral, I would say that first of all, the key importance is to understand where the carbon coming from. And then we can develop the sectoral targets. For power sector, what's the target? For transportation, what the targets? Because ultimately, relying just on one sector to address this carbon neutral may impose a lot of challenges to that particular sector itself. So I would say that more cross-sectoral initiative, more cross-sectoral collaborations are required to make sure that we are able to deliver our aspirations. And next, with regards to the awareness, this I also see this as one of the key questions, how we address the awareness level. So based on the recent survey done in Malaysia, we can also say that this climate change and the sustainable energy, the awareness level are still low. So I would say part of the initiative by SEDA is to have this kind of promotions and awareness session. And we have collaborated with a lot of financial sectors. PETRONAS also one of our key engagement parties, to provide more and more understanding with regards to where we are heading to. And ultimately, personally, I would say that the youth always play an important role to make sure that whatever we set today are able to sustain all the way until 2050. So 2050, we're talking about 30 years down the road. Myself also not sure if I will still be living that time, but this will be taken up by the next generation, the youth itself. So we have a lot of collaboration with universities, MMU, Sunway, Uniten, for example, to educate more, and we are much happier than to engage also UTP on this.
Thank you.
So I would say that this is also part of the initiative in terms of increasing the awareness. And the last one, I would say that in aligning to the private sector's needs and the sustainable directions, I would say it will transform our current business as usual. It's indeed not a walk in the park. It has a significant implications on the economy, financial, social impacts, for example, and this indeed a timely for a more progressive policies and supports to drive the agenda. So I would say that these three items are the key importance from my perspective with regards to the cross-sectoral awareness and also the policy driven to support this kind of agenda are the three main things that we need. So that will be my key remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Dr. Nick.
I'll be very, very brief. So, well, firstly, thank you, UTP, for this excellent event. It's been really wonderful to be part of. I guess that the messages I would just leave you with, I'm very encouraged by the leadership being shown by Malaysia, by Petronas, and by UTP, and I genuinely believe those that lead will end up being more successful than those that choose not to lead, and particularly those who sort of are left behind. I think that leadership is really important. So I commend you for that. I think there is something we haven't talked about, but I think some of the points came across in Dr. Ibrahim's presentation around this system-wide approach. We need to think about integration with energy, with mobility, with energy efficiency, with housing, with industry, and I think that is a really important thing. This can't be done in isolation, and that really leads me to my last point. I mean, if we are to be successful, as you just said, Dr. Ibrahim, collaboration has got to be at the forefront of this, and I'm delighted to see the role that my own organisation, the Energy Institute, is playing, but also working with groups like CEDA and many others. And we need to bring people with us on this journey, the importance of the next generation. I personally do want to be around in 2050 to see what has happened by then, but I probably am not going to be leading the Energy Institute in 2050, and we need to bring through that next generation of bright young professionals. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It has been a pleasant session. I do not feel tired at all talking to both of you. And I can see the chat box. There are lots of questions that we didn't get to address. I am so sorry, everyone. I just want to check before we end our session. Prof. Ibrahim, are you in, Prof? I believe we have enabled the microphone for you to unmute if you are. Yes. Yes, Prof. Maybe you want to say hi to both panels.
Hi, Dr. Nick and Dr. Ibrahim, Dr. Amila, of course. Thank you very much. I've really enjoyed the session. As a matter of fact, gentlemen, I will be having sort of a very early morning session tomorrow, where I was asked to sort of be a speaker on sustainability for the GFCC. And the information, the questions that you have answered was very good. You know, Nick, there was always a concern about this availability of fund, especially now that the world economy has been hit so hard with the COVID-19 pandemic, right? But I guess your answer to a certain extent is correct. Yeah, I guess the world is never short of money, but the question is, how do you do it correctly? Because you need to convince the funder, right? They are doing it in the right way, the more objective and more responsible way, in order to provide the continuous return, which will then cycle itself back in order to provide the funding. But I guess there's another question that I was looking at is the carbon pricing, the fair carbon pricing, yeah, between the rich and the poor. But anyway, thank you very much. You guys have been fantastic, I would say. I've enjoyed the 2-hour session with you guys. Thank you, Dr. Mila, for allowing me to say something. And of course, gentlemen, thank you very much. I hope we'll have more of this session as we go forward. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof.
Thank you.
Yeah, I take that as our concluding remarks for the event today. Thank you very much. What a pleasant surprise, Prof. Ibrahim. So to the panel speakers, Dr. Nick and Mr. Ibrahim, thank you so much for gracing us with all your thoughts today. I hope the audience have also enjoyed the session as much as we do. So with that, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Nick, you have a good day. You still have a long day. We are already concluding. It's 5 p.m. I'm going home. So thank you everyone, to all the audience. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Dr. Nick. See you around.
Thank you. Bye-bye.